Hello everyone, I'm very glad that you listened to my story. Please give me a follow and like the video if you enjoyed it. Feel free to comment and provide feedback so I can improve the sound quality. Yes, I will now continue the unfinished story. Chapter 9, Picked It Up, 2. Cale held a bag that was twice the size of yesterday's bag as he headed back up to the top of the slums. The two siblings were there to greet him once again. The children kept their mouths shut as they looked toward Cale. Cale smiled as he took out two small bags and pushed them toward the children. "Take it." The young girl slowly approached him. Cale frowned as he watched the girl with coarse gray hair approach him. She had a hand on her side as she limped over to him. Cale pushed the two bags toward the young boy. "You come here and take it." The young boy quickly rushed over and snatched the bags before quickly running back. Compared to Cale's bright red hair, the boy had coarse dark red hair that shook as he ran. Cale then turned around and headed toward the man-eating tree. "Wow! It's not bread. It's meat and cake." He could hear the siblings talking about the food, but he did not care. He continued to walk toward the man-eating tree's territory. It's a bit scary. The black tree without any leaves seemed to be moving its branches to welcome Cale. This eerie feeling made Cale nervous, but he still poured the contents of the bag into the hole underneath the tree. The bread quickly disappeared. It was at that moment. "More, give me more. It's driving me crazy." The response he read about in the novel showed up. It was the voice of a weak girl. Yes, the person who starved to death was a priestess who served a god. However, unlike the present-day priestesses of the temples or churches, the ancient priestesses were shamans. The majority of the ancient shamans could be considered people who had superpowers or natural forces under their command. Cale quickly grabbed the bag and started to move. "Cale, come to my study tonight." That was what his father, Deruth, had said to Cale when he went to get some allowance. That was why he had to leave here before evening at the latest. He came here with the intention of taking care of half of the gluttony of the tree today. He went back down the hill to get more bread. He could see the two siblings looking at him with cake on their lips. Cale frowned and clicked his tongue as he walked past the two siblings. Cale then walked to the street where there were a lot of bakeries. He had already swept the stock of the bakery he went to yesterday this morning, so it would take them some time to restock. That was why he needed to look for another bakery. It was at that moment. "Why, young master?" A woman's voice made Cale turn his head. A middle-aged woman smiled awkwardly as she pointed to her shop. Her hand was shaking and she was full of fear, but she still had some confidence. "We have a lot of bread." Cale started to smile. Now this was a woman who knew how to do business. The other vendors were peeking their way while looking at what was going on. Cale threw her a gold coin and the woman quickly picked it up. "Give me everything you have. Pack it quickly." In that instant, the smile on the middle-aged woman's face grew wider. She instantly went into the store and immediately came back out with a large bag full of bread. She had already packed it all up in advance. "Here it is, young master." Wow! She really is a good merchant. This was someone who knew how to make money. "I can also prepare some more." Cale liked this woman even more. However, at that instant, "Young master, we can make even more bread than that." An old man across the street raised his hand as he rushed over. He was wearing a baker's uniform. Cale liked his fitting outfit and threw a gold coin to him as well. "I will head to your shop next. Have a bag ready." "Thank you very much." Cale was amazed by these vendors. They were still afraid of him because of his identity as the trash of the Count's family, but they had no issues coming up to him to make some easy money. It was probably because they knew that Cale did not hit anybody who was not a gangster, but he still could see why the Henituse territory was doing so well. The fact that Cale had spent a gold coin to buy a bag of bread yesterday had already spread like wildfire. 1 million gallons. The others gasped at the week's worth of profit while their eyes started to sparkle. I can go around to those 3 places tomorrow to get bread. Since he gave each of them a gold coin, he should be able to get another bag from them tomorrow. Cale was happy that things were going so smoothly. However, there was someone who was watching him from afar. It was the chef, B. Crocs. Just like his father, he had a bandage around his neck, and he was watching Cale from behind a corner. He just watched Cale buy the bag of bread and some medicinal herbs before heading back to the slums. Did he go crazy? Cale seemed like he had gone crazy since yesterday. B. Crocs had never cared about Cale, even when his father had said that Cale was an interesting kid, but, the more he saw, the more he started to agree. It felt like it would be just as fun to watch Cale as it was to watch the black-haired punk. B. Crocs's eyes started to sparkle. Billows, the owner of the tea shop with the highest view, took a sip of his tea as he received his subordinate's report. Young Master Cale is going in and out of the slums. Yes, Billows Nim. I see. We also received communication from the capital. Is that so? Billows's round eyes, that were hard to see because of his fat, opened widely. The subordinate flinched for a moment before continuing his report. Yes. It mentioned that the crown will soon gather people. That is why they wish for Billows Nim to return and get to work. Clank. Billows put the teacup on the table as he motioned with his chin. You can head out now. The subordinate quickly moved into the shadows and disappeared. Billows stared at the spot his subordinate was standing in as one corner of his lips twisted upward. Do they think I will be their dog and watch the house again? His gaze headed out of the window. It felt like his gaze could reach the faraway capital. This isn't bread. Isn't bread. And seeing the young girl who was mumbling, isn't bread, over and over as she held the medicinal herbs in her hand, Cale just snorted as he headed back to the man-eating tree. However, the young boy got in his way. You cannot die. It was the young boy saying he cannot die now. Cale did not even frown as he just walked past the young boy. Cale, no, Kim Rock-soo. He was an orphan and didn't have anything to his name. That was why there were a lot of people who showed the poor Kim Rock-soo a lot of sympathy. Is there a reason to show sympathy for the needy? That was something he heard all the time when he was younger. Young beggar. Poor orphan. You don't need a reason to show sympathy. There was a time he just took that at face value, but he started to understand the real meaning of it as he got older. There wasn't a logical reason for the things your heart draws you to do. You didn't need a reason. So annoying. Cale hated to see young children being hurt. However, he didn't have any thoughts about nursing the young girl nor thoughts of consoling her. He frowned toward the young girl who was limping toward him and the young boy next to her as he answered them. The siblings finally stopped following him once he said that. Cale was unhappy at the thought that he did something he hated the most. He hated people who got involved in other people's business without being asked, but he had done just that by giving the young girl the medicinal herbs. More, give me more. Yes. Eat it all. Cale dumped the whole bag into the man-eating tree without caring about how it landed. He was not afraid. The bread instantly disappeared into the darkness that was now too light to be called darkness. Cale could now see a new gray light. However, it would only seem gray to him. I guess it is paying off for the money I spent. Cale poured the other bag of bread into the hole as he headed back home. He didn't see the siblings anymore, but that was better for Cale. However, he saw the 2 struggling cats on his way back home and flinched. It's the cats from yesterday. They shouldn't remember me, right? Silver fur and golden eyes, dark red fur and golden eyes. The 2 cats did not even meow as they stared at Cale. Cale did not want to cause a scene, and just looked away as he headed back home. He then heard something from his father that almost made him faint. Could you please say that one more time? Yes. Cale. Basin was standing next to Cale as well. The story of the Henituse family that was not mentioned in the novel was happening in front of Cale's eyes. You shall go to the capital as our family's representative. Cale could feel a headache coming. Originally, Basin was supposed to go. However, you are the firstborn of our family. Cale just opened and closed his mouth repeatedly as he watched Count Deruth sitting there with a gentle smile. Going to visit the crown at such a time. Cale was quickly thinking about the contents of The Birth of a Hero as Deruth continued to speak. The crown is hosting a big event, and the noble families of each territory have been invited to gather. It will be your first time to go visit the crown, but Basin has been going to similar functions for the last 2 years. However, I am hoping for you to go this time. Big event hosted by the crown. That made Cale think about a single incident. The Plaza Terror incident. A secret organization commits a terrorist act when many of the citizens of the capital are gathered in one place. Our hero Choi Han is the one who manages to block about half of their plot. That would be the 4th time that Choi Han and the secret organization would come into contact with each other. As a result, Choi Han is able to save a lot of the citizens at the plaza and becomes connected with the crown prince. They then quickly develop a friendship with each other. Cale suddenly got the chills. Since the novel described the event from Choi Han's point of view, it did not talk much about the gathering of the nobles. All it mentioned was that Choi Han gained some party members before and after the incident, as well as the strong backing of the crown prince. But he had to go to the scene of that terrorist attack. Of course, he did not know whether the nobles would gather in the plaza as well. Cale started to recall the information in The Birth of a Hero. Tons of people were gathered in the plaza. The platform was still empty. It was for the royal family that would soon arrive. Choi Han could see some other people who looked like they held important positions. However, more important to Choi Han, was the fact that a lot of citizens, young, old, male, female, were gathered here. Choi Han's heart started to beat faster. He did not want to see a group of innocent people dying ever again. Would people who looked like they held important positions include the nobles? Cale turned to look at Basin even as his father was continuing to speak. Basin stood there stoically, looking at his father without giving Cale a single glance. Deruth said Basin normally goes to events like this. Should I tell him to go? Cale's mouth continued to repeatedly open and close. He did not want to go to a dangerous area. However, he could not bring himself to say Basin's name. A relationship that was neither good nor bad. That was the relationship between the original Cale and Basin. Basin found Cale to be difficult, but that was it. Cale's mind started to get complicated. Would Cale have gone in the story? There was no way Deruth would send the trash to the capital. Just why was he trying to send him then? Cale was wondering if he had done something wrong to have caused this to happen. You will leave in 5 days. 5 days later. Hearing Deruth say that, Cale knew that the Cale in the novel had not gone to the capital. In the novel, he was beaten to a pulp by Choi Han 4 days later and carried into the Count's estate. There was no way he could go to the capital in that condition. Cale. Before Basin started to do it, you had participated in all of these ceremonies. Think back on those times and have a relaxed journey. Father. Deruth looked toward Cale at his calling. Basin slowly turned to look at his older brother as well. I am a bit anxious because of this sudden development. I have not gone to any of these since 2 years ago. I don't understand why I would suddenly have to go. Please let me think about it. Deruth agreed and told his 2 sons that they could leave. The siblings quickly left the study. Cale was busy thinking about all sorts of things. If Cale threw a fit and caused a scene, Deruth would probably send Basin, but that would leave a bitter taste in his mouth. Hyungnim. Cale could hear his young brother, Basin's voice. Cale turned his head. He could see Basin still stoically walking without looking at him. The 15-year-old Basin always talked like this without ever making eye contact. Hyungnim, there is no reason you cannot go. Sigh. Cale let out a sigh. Basin did not even look at Cale as he left the study and headed to his own room. Cale stared at Basin for a long time. It's not supposed to go like this. Cale had been pushed out of the successor spot. Cale could not stop acting like trash even when his younger brother flat out acted like he was the family's successor since 2 years ago. He was the joke of the family. That was why there were a lot of reasons he should not go as the family representative to the crown summon. However, Basin was saying that there were no reasons not to go to the event. Basin was saying that there were enough reasons for Cale to go as the family representative. Things will become complicated like this. Cale stated to frown. He did not like how things were going. But the other problem was, it's worth a shot. He thought it was worth going through the events that were about to come up. The reason was that the chances of Cale coming back without dying or getting hurt were pretty high. It will also make it difficult for me if Basin dies without being able to take the count position. In order for Cale to live a peaceful life, Basin needed to survive. There was still their youngest sister, Lily, but she was too young. Furthermore, Cale needed to head out of Western City after taking the ancient power located at the man-eating tree in order to take some other ancient powers located outside the Henituse territory. The scale inside Cale's mind started to tilt. He started to stare at Deputy Butler Hans who was heading his way. Hans's expression was intense, but not dark. He seemed to be a bit bitter, but his eyes were clear. "Young master, the request that your guest has asked for dash." Hans. Cale cut him off as he said something else. "Bring that guest here." Cale was not going to be pushed around. If he was going to have to move, he might as well do it in a way that was most comfortable for him and in a way that was most beneficial for him. If he doesn't want to come, just tell him this. Based on Hans's expression, Cale was certain that Choi Han's issue was settled properly. In the novel, Count Deruth gave a proper funeral for the villagers and took care of everything even after Choi Han beat Cale to a pulp. That shouldn't have changed at all. Payment. Pardon. Tell him to come because a way for him to pay me back has come up. Chapter 10, Picked It Up, 3. Deputy Butler Hans immediately ordered another servant to call Choi Han over. "Where is he right now?" He is with Ron in Chef B. Crox's kitchen." Cale's heart jumped as he walked into the study. Were the three of them getting along as expected? Based on what I've been told, he is learning how to cook basic dishes from Chef B. Crox. Cooking. One corner of Cale's lips went up. Cooking my ass. They were calling it cooking, but he was probably learning about torturing, or B. Crox and Ron were admiring Choi Han's sword skill. Cale didn't need to see it to know the truth. Cale naturally walked over and sat down at his desk. He then casually asked Hans, who was idly standing in the corner. What did he ask for? Hans seemed shocked at Cale's sudden words, before quickly putting on a serious expression and started to report. It was the information Cale expected it to be. Hans could not hide his sorrow and disappointment while sharing about what happened to Harris village, and had gone to the Count with Choi Han to deliver the village chief's plaque that Choi Han brought. Father met with him. Yes. The Count immediately ordered for a funeral and will be sending inspectors, knights, and soldiers to investigate. Hans stopped for a moment and hesitated before continuing to speak. However, the guest has indicated he will not be going back with us. Hans recalled meeting the Count with Choi Han, as Choi Han explained the situation to the Count. Choi Han was speaking normally, but the tips of his fingers were shaking. It was then that Hans found out that Choi Han was 17 years old. He was able to keep his life because he happened to be searching for medicinal herbs on his own at the time of the massacre, but he still had to watch his neighbors and friends all being killed at such a young age. Just how much shock would he have received? Will that be okay? That was why Hans had asked Cale. Will it be okay for him to not say his final farewell? It is his decision. Cale answered Hans's question and changed the topic. He already knew why Choi Han did not want to return. He had already said his goodbye as he buried them. All that was left was to get his revenge on the people that took their future away. Has Ron been taking care of him? Yes. He has made sure that the guest eats every meal. He has also been very friendly with him. The three of them did indeed seem to be getting along. Hans seemed to have remembered something as he continued to speak. Mr. Ron seems to have hurt himself while working again. He had bandages around his wrist. Really? Make sure to give him some medicine. He probably killed someone again. That was what Cale was thinking. He heard Hans's voice at that time. I will make sure to deliver young master's words and feelings to Mr. Ron. Hans opened his mouth to say something as he looked at Cale's nonchalant expression, but a different noise filled the study. Knock knock knock. Choi Han had arrived. Hans opened the door, and Cale could see Choi Han standing outside. Cale waved his hand to send Hans away, and Hans bowed his head as he quietly exited the study. Only Cale and Choi Han were left in the room. Cale kept the desk between them as he pointed at the chair across from him. Come sit down. Choi Han slowly looked around the study as he sat down on the chair. Cale gave him enough time to look around the study. Like a typical pure and smart hero, Choi Han liked books. That was why the first thing he did after coming out of the Forest of Darkness and arriving in Harris village was to learn how to read from the chief. After looking around for a long time, Choi Han's gaze finally landed on Cale. What is the payment? Getting right to the point. Cale smiled, looking at how Choi Han didn't beat around the bush. Payment. Choi Han was thorough when it came to debts he owed. Cale, Kim Rok-soo, realized that he had changed the contents of the beginning of The Birth of a Hero. He could see that even more things would change because of it. That was why he was trying his best to not change too many things, but he had to go to the capital. Then even more things will change. Cale put a piece of paper on the desk as he looked toward Choi Han. There is a way for you to pay back for the meal, but I need to first determine whether you will be capable of doing it. In simple terms, this is an interview. Please go ahead. Choi Han immediately agreed to Cale's talk of checking his qualifications. Cale started to ask. Do you know how to protect people? What do you mean? Choi Han flinched for the first time and asked after a moment. Cale's gaze started to turn sharp. He was looking at the piece of paper on the desk and not at Choi Han. Although he had to quickly change the plan, it might bring him more gains than before. He could prevent Choi Han's party from getting the ancient powers while taking the ones that he needs for himself. Those powers were useless to them anyway. Cale kept his gaze on the paper as he continued to speak. Simple. Are you capable of protecting people instead of killing people? Silence filled the room. Choi Han did not have an answer. Cale removed his gaze from the paper and looked at the person sitting on the chair. Choi Han was sitting there with his head down, but eventually answered. I am not sure. Cale clicked his tongue. This was why it was dangerous to provoke Choi Han right now. But you can kill someone. The answer came easily this time. Absolutely. Then you should be able to protect people as well. Choi Han's eyes shook for a moment. That is difficult. But difficult does not mean impossible. There were not many things in the world you could avoid because it was difficult. The life that Cale had lived was like that. That was why he was so happy to possess the body of a trash like Cale who could do whatever he wants. But, unfortunately, there was now a mountain he needed to first climb in order to have that damn peaceful future. Cale was looking for someone to climb and flip that mountain for him. Choi Han had a bitter smile on his face. I guess that's true. Yes, it is. Now the final interview question. Yes. Please ask. Cale looked into Choi Han's firm gaze as he asked the last question. What is your name? You don't know my name. Of course, I do. You're the person who was going to beat me up. I have heard from other people, but I want to hear it directly from you. Choi Han. Choi Han reached his hand out. My name is Choi Han. Cale shook Choi Han's hand. Great. I am Cale Henituse. The short conversation called an interview quickly finished. Of course, it was a passing grade. Cale pushed the paper on the desk toward Choi Han. The way you can pay me back is simple. There were 2 names written on the paper. It also indicated where he would meet them. Go to the capital with these people. These were the party members Choi Han would meet on his way to the capital. B. Crocs and these 2 people would grow and get strong with Choi Han until Volume 5. Rosalind and Locke. One was the princess of a neighboring kingdom who was returning to her kingdom after surviving an assassination attempt, and the other was an injured kid. Of course, that kid was the heir to the Wolf King. It was possible for him to transform into a wolf. Princess Rosalind was strong and cold. She had the most explosive strength after Choi Han and used her strength logically. She was not interested in taking control of the throne. Instead, her goal was to create the continent's greatest magic tower, and she would grow into a hero as she moved closer to her goal. The Archduke of the kingdom, who attempted the assassination on Rosalind, will be tortured by B. Crocs in the future. Cale's heart started to shake as he recalled just how clear and descriptive that torture scene had been in the novel. His heart seemed to be shaking quite a bit these days. Rosalind. Locke. Cale nodded his head at Choi Han's voice. Yes. Those 2 people. I'm glad you know how to read. Choi Han continued to stare at the 2 names. Cale's gaze fell on the name Locke. Locke. This world had other races such as elves, dwarves, and beast people. However, the most secretive of all races were the beast people. Beast people. This included beasts, birds, and even insects. Beast people were different from monsters because of the existence of a conscience. Locke has the purest blood of the wolf people. Locke had received the bloodline to dominate the wolves. The beast people with the purest bloodline tend to look weak and average when they are in their animal form or their human form. However, once they enter their berserk state, they become more cruel and violent than anyone else. And Locke was the only survivor of the entire Blue Wolf tribe. Cale took a map out of a drawer and opened it up on the desk. You will start the journey with me. He then pointed to a location on the map. We will separate at this point. You just follow what I wrote on the paper. Choi Han didn't ask any questions and just quietly listened. Cale watched Choi Han for a bit. There was a reason Choi Han had to go with him until that specific point. I need to avoid the crazy dragon. The beginning of the birth of a hero. Like any other novel, new villains had to appear after Cale. However, those villains were not easy picking like Cale. The next villain involved a marquis who led one of the noble factions. Throughout the beginning of the novel, he gets in the way of the Crown Prince and Choi Han. He ends up being ruined around Volume 2, but Choi Han runs into the marquis for the first time on this trip to the capital. That bastard raised the crazy dragon. It definitely was a crazy dragon. It was still just a baby dragon. That black dragon was being tortured by the Marquis's future successor in secret. They were training it to obey the Marquis's commands. They're crazy too. Dragons are the strongest beings in the world. How do they think they will be able to tame a dragon? It actually does make sense. The Marquis managed to get his hands on a dragon egg through the secret organization and chained it down with mana-restricting chains as soon as it hatched. Cale could not fathom the extent of the strength of that secret organization. But would dragons be called the strongest beings in the world for no reason? This black dragon, that was less than 5 years old, was still a dragon. In the end, the dragon goes crazy and berserk. It may be young, but in the novel, it exploded with enough mana to remove the mana restricting chains. Since its mana was restricted, the mana it exploded was actually its own life force. After living in a cave and being tortured every day without ever being able to see sunlight, the young dragon cuts into its own life force to find freedom. After managing to escape, the dragon ends up losing its rationality and goes berserk. The village that Choi Han is staying at the time almost ends up in danger because of the berserk dragon, and Choi Han ends up fighting against the black dragon. Choi Han gazed at the small dragon that was less than 1 meter long. It managed to blow up a mountain with that small body and put the villagers in significant danger. However, Choi Han could not easily attack this dragon. The eyes of this dragon that had lost its rationality were in pain and full of sorrow. However, the black dragon's mouth was smiling. Choi Han found that to be extremely sad. Choi Han ends up killing that black dragon and gifting it the freedom called death. Cale had to go to that village. Either Choi Han takes care of it or I prevent it from going crazy and find a way to release it. There was no other choice because it was on his way to the capital. He would need to take an extremely long detour to avoid that village, and that would require a long time and change the flow of the story. He would also be late in arriving at the capital if he took that detour. For being a crazy dragon, it's described as being a really cute dragon. The novel described it as a cute black dragon with short legs. It mentioned that it was even scarier that such a cute existence had gone crazy and caused chaos. Cale decided to stop thinking about the dragon for now, and instead gave Choi Han the rest of the order. Come to the capital with the owners of these 2 names. That is your way of paying me back. Choi Han asked a question. I just need to protect these 2 people. If you want to. These 2 people should be strong enough to not require Choi Han's protection. Especially Princess Rosalind, she wouldn't even budge an inch even if a truckload of Cales with the indestructible shield attacked her at the same time. Do as you wish. However, you must definitely come to the capital. You must also meet me there without being injured. You can at least keep yourself safe, right? Cale and Choi Han should have no reason to meet again after that. Choi Han has another negative encounter with the secret organization after getting involved with Locke. Meeting with Locke should allow Choi Han to stop the danger in the capital like in the novel. Why are you not answering? Can you do it? Choi Han's gaze became a bit clearer. Yes. I can do it. He seemed to be speaking in a more respectful tone than before, but Cale just let it be. He relaxed a bit after seeing Choi Han put the paper in his chest pocket. I should have been drinking as I did that. It was really tiring to talk to Choi Han with callous body. Cale waved his hand at Choi Han. Choi Han started to walk toward the door after seeing Cale's gesture. Cale leaned his back on the chair and watched Choi Han reach for the door before starting to speak again. In addition, everything we discussed here is a secret. I'm sure I don't need to tell you that. Choi Han did not look back and answered as he opened the door. Of course. Choi Han's voice seemed to indicate that he was smiling, but Cale did not care. Once he was alone, Cale took out a piece of paper and pen and started to write in Korean. After writing for a while, he left the study and headed for his father's office. Yes. I need money. Okay. I will tell Hans to give you some. Cale needed a lot of money. Once Cale laid down on the bed with another 10 million-gallon check in his chest pocket, Ron approached him and put a bottle on the nightstand as he started to speak. It is warm lemon honey tea. My son made it especially for you, young master. Please have a good night. I am always by your side. Cale's sleepiness went away in an instant. No matter what happened, he needed to make sure the 2 of them went away with Choi Han. The next day, Cale Henituse headed to the slums as soon as he woke up. Chapter 11, Picked It Up, 4. Young Master. I heard about everything from Deputy Butler Hans. This Ron will do whatever I can with my lacking abilities to make sure you can shine at the capital. Cale's shoulders were starting to shake as he walked out of the Count's estate. He was thinking about the conversation he had with Ron as soon as he woke up this morning. This is going to be your first time outside the Henituse territory, right? I am very good at hunting rabbits. I will hunt some rabbits for you when we are camping outside. Ron's calm and benign voice echoed in Cale's ears. He felt as if he could still hear Ron's voice echoing like a hallucination throughout the fog outside. Cale was scared of the fact that Ron was explaining to him about how to hunt a rabbit first thing in the morning. You need to be careful when handling a small animal like a rabbit that gets scared easily. Since you don't know when or how it will run, you need to pay attention to the surroundings and kill it in an instant. You also need to remove the innards after catching it. I am also very good at that. Cale had to turn away as Ron mimicked cutting open a rabbit with his hands. Ron was excited. However, the only thought Cale was having right now was that Ron was toying with him. Cale was just happy that Ron was heading to the capital with him. I can tack on B. Crocs as my personal chef. Ron. B. Crocs. Cale had already told Hans this morning, so that he could bring the father and son duo with him. Of course, Ron was there as well. Hans, I want to take B. Crocs as my personal chef for this trip. May I ask, why B. Crocs? He is extremely busy running kitchen #2. I don't know. But I can't eat anything other than B. Crocs's cooking. I will be taking him, so you figure out the rest. Hans became anxious, but Ron seemed to be happy to be going with his son. Young master, my son will be very happy. We had a need to go to the capital anyways. I will deliver your exact words to him. Cale relaxed after hearing Ron's words. He was worried that they would say no, but B. Crocs should enjoy leaving the Henituse territory and traveling to the capital as well. Cale walked through the foggy western city as he thought about the people he would take with him to the capital. The story was progressing a little differently than the novel, but it wasn't like he could give up on gaining some benefits for himself. Young master, you are here early today. The baker seemed to be pretty relaxed around Cale after seeing him a couple of times. Cale just stoically asked the baker. The bread. The baker smiled as he handed Cale a bag full of bread. Of course, I have it already. But is today really the last day? Why? Greedy for more money? Yes, I definitely am. Cale started to smile. He liked honest answers like this. Cale patted the shoulder of the baker, who seemed to be a bit more relaxed around him, and headed for the slums. I'll come back when I want to eat it again. The baker longingly watched as Cale disappeared into the fog and then started to pray. He was praying for Cale to come back and spend a ton of money. Cale naturally did not know about the baker's prayer as he walked over to the slums. He then saw the siblings waiting for him. Do these kids not have a home? Cale had come much earlier than usual. However, the siblings were curled up together and waiting for him, as if they had been waiting at the top of the hill all night. The younger brother seemed to be leaning into his older sister's embrace. The siblings were quietly looking up at Cale. Their hair and clothes seemed damp, probably because they stayed here through the foggy morning. Of course, Cale pretended not to notice. Here, take it. The young boy took both of their shares from Cale. Cale waited until the boy picked it up before turning around and heading for the man-eating tree. I'm glad it is foggy. The fog made it difficult to see. Since this hill was the highest point in Western City, other than the Count's estate, the fog was even thicker up here. Nobody else would be able to see what Cale is doing, or more importantly, what Cale receives from the tree. More, give me more. Please. Cale poured a bag of bread into the hole while listening to the eerie voice of the grudge-filled soul as usual. The darkness inside the hole was slowly turning from gray to white. Cale started to smile, thinking that all his efforts were not for naught. It was at that moment. More, more, more. What? Cale flinched and stepped backwards at the voice that now turned into a shriek. The novel didn't mention something like this. More, more. I will give you a present if you bring me more. A present. Present. That word made Cale's eyes start to sparkle. Although he didn't expect the soul to go crazy like this, the end was near. Just wait. The black branch started to sway, as if nodding at him. It felt like a scene out of a horror movie. Cale shivered as he started to move back through the fog. It was the middle of the morning now, but the sun was not out, and the fog continued to get thicker. It looked like it would start to rain soon. The siblings must have gone somewhere, as he did not see them, but Cale just thought they went to dodge the rain and put the third bag of bread in front of the man-eating tree. This should be the last bunch. The light inside the hole was now as white as the fog surrounding Cale. It should become transparent after I put this last bag of bread in. Cale was full of anticipation as he poured the last bag into the tree. And finally, a rumbling that was worlds different than the past rumblings poured out from the tree toward Cale. This rumbling, that was only aimed at Cale, did not catch his attention because of the hole that was starting to turn transparent. It should be dark inside the hole because of the shadow of the tree, but such a realistic situation did not occur. That was the ancient power. The moment Cale saw the ancient power, he could hear the voice that had been asking him for more food until now. It was so good. That voice was obnoxious. That soft texture of bread. I especially liked the third bag of bread you brought. I guess even food develops as time goes by. There was no such thing as bread back in my days. The wheat itself must grow on a really fertile land. Yes, not all wheat is the same. The voice was evaluating the taste of the bread. A storm caused by the voice started to rush toward Cale. This wasn't in the novel. The spirit that was tied down to the earth because of its grudge was resolving that grudge by evaluating the taste of the bread. Cale started to frown further. He was only thinking about the ancient power in the birth of a hero. This indestructible shield was the only ancient power that was written about in the novel but never claimed by anyone. No wonder nobody ended up taking control of it. But then why would the author mention something that could be useful but was never actually taken by anybody? That was the thought in Cale's head. However, the obnoxious voice continued to chatter away, making him unable to focus. That's why I am so full. It was delicious. Chatter chatter. It felt like the grudge was from not being able to speak instead of not being able to eat. After hearing the spirit chat on and on for a couple of minutes, evaluating all of the different types of breads that Cale had brought, Cale nodded his head and tried to cut the voice off. Things like this were not available in ancient times. The people of the forest of darkness claimed to be servants of a god yet only gave me tasteless things. However, Cale decided to wait a little longer after hearing the spirit mention the ancient times. I was, naturally, banished from that place. They said I was a glutton. A glutton my ass. Of course, I left with my friends. We were planning on putting the world back on the right track. For someone like him who needed ancient powers, it was important to listen to stories about the ancient times. However, the story soon ended, and the spirit went back to talking about food and other useless things. Cale quickly cut it off. I don't think I could give up this taste even if I got fat. It's so unfair that I had to eat dirt and ended up dying. Yes, it was an amazing and professional evaluation. You're a bit lewd. The spirit cut Cale off. You understand my evaluation. You are a really good guy? Thanks. Cale couldn't tell whether he could really communicate with the spirit or not. Cale really could not figure out the situation at hand. At least the voice stopped after telling him thanks. Cale looked toward the tree in front of him. How interesting. The man-eating tree, the originally black man-eating tree, was starting to turn white. It then started to slowly grow some green leaves. The scene looked even more mystical because he was surrounded by fog right now. The noise held some heaviness compared to before. Cale kneeled on one side and sat down underneath the trunk of the tree. A bright white light was pouring out from the hole. Cale put his hand into the light. He then closed his eyes. This must be it. A warm and strong power that wrapped around his hand. He started to smile before hearing the voice one more time. It was a pure and warm voice. It will protect you. Shiyayayan. For a very short moment, a bright light wrapped around Cale. The light was silver in color, and the light started to become absorbed by his body. The absorbed light all gathered at Cale's heart. Cale let out a long sigh as he opened his eyes. It did not hurt. It was warm, and the pure power was making him feel happy. Cale quickly lifted up the shirt that he was wearing. I did it. There was a small silver shield inscribed over his heart. It was different from a tattoo. Such a beautiful and fancy shield left its mark over Cale's heart. The shield will prioritize its owner's safety above anything else. The location of that promise was at the heart. This shield will be with Cale until his heart stops beating. How nice. Cale could feel the strength wrapping around his heart. It was not causing any issues. In fact, it felt like the shield had surrounded his heart, and was doing its best to protect him. Ancient powers like this left their unique mark when they are activated. Cale quickly used the method that was written in the novel to trigger the ancient power. Pa'ayat. The indestructible shield appeared in front of Cale's eyes. It was a silver shield that was just large enough to cover Cale's upper body. There were two silver wings on both sides of the shield, which allowed the shield to move within a certain radius from Cale. The size of the shield was also controllable. Cale started to control the size of this shield that already felt like it was a part of his body. This immediate familiarity was one of the special traits of ancient powers. That was why heroes used it, even if it was just as a support. Cale started to smile. A maximum of 2 times. Cale was thinking in terms of Choi Han, the strongest person around him right now. The shield should be able to block 2 of Choi Han's attacks. The strength of this shield is stronger than I expected. Why would the heroes not use it all the time? The indestructible shield, unlike its name, actually is capable of breaking. However, it does not disappear upon breaking. If the shield receives an attack stronger than its abilities, it will store as much of its strength as possible to protect the owner's heart before it breaks. After a while, the shield will recover its strength and can be used again. The strength of the shield comes from the owner's heart. The beating heart. That heart becomes the strength of the shield. The heart strengthens the shield while the shield protects the heart. So, what would happen if the heart gets stronger? It will get even stronger. There were many ways to strengthen ancient powers. Cale will be strengthening this shield on the way to the capital. Once that happens, he should be able to make a shield that can last 10, no, at least 5 minutes when someone of Choi Han's caliber tries to kill him with all of their strength. Ancient powers, as seen with this man-eating tree, are difficult to earn unless you, coincidentally run into them. The person who knows the most about these coincidences in the first 5 volumes is probably Cale Henituse, well, the current Cale Henituse. Cale started to smile. He reached out and touched the shield. It felt nice. However, there was one thing he didn't like about it. It seems too divine. At full strength, it looked like a holy shield that the knights of God carry with their swords in myths. Of course, the former owner of this shield was a priestess who was tired of the term God, and the current owner, Cale, just didn't like gods. It's not like there will be many reasons for me to use this. He was planning on leaving the fighting to everyone else. The terror attack at the capital. He may have to use it if something dangerous happens there. But he will make sure it is small and faint so that other people will not notice it. Cale returned the shield to his heart and patted the now white tree as he started to walk away. The misty rain inside the fog started to wet Cale's shoulders. Cale liked the fog, but did not like rain. He started to walk faster toward home. He needed a carriage. Meow. Meow. Cale suddenly felt a chill on the back of his neck. It was the alley right outside the Count's estate. He could see two pairs of round, golden eyes. Cale started to frown. There were two kittens who looked extremely pitiful and drenched in the rain. They continued to meow as they approached Cale. They then started to rub their cheeks on Cale's legs. Cale let out a sigh and started to walk. The two little kittens followed behind them. The tiny things somehow managed to keep up with Cale, even with their short legs. "Young master, what is going on?" The person who greeted Cale at home was Deputy Butler Hans. Hans had a confused expression as his eyes opened wide. He seemed to be shocked. Cale clicked his tongue and handed Hans the things in his hands. "Don't ask stupid questions and just take them." Hans's eyes started to shake. What cute and lovely kittens. This deputy butler really did seem to be butler material. Cale carefully put the two kittens in the hands of the extremely excited Hans. The two kittens, that were dangling in Hans's hands, continued to look at Cale, even when they were in Hans's arms. "Young master, may I take care of these two lovely kittenims?" "Whatever you want." Hans started to smile in joy. Cale started to walk past the excited Hans as he added on. For your information, they become quiet if you give them food. The two of them are also siblings." The two kittens flinched and started to shake. Their golden eyes opened widely as they looked toward Cale. The moment Hans asked in confusion, Cale moved back toward Hans. He then lowered his head and caressed the two kittens. He had wondered about it for the last few days, but how could he not know by now? The silver kitten had a faint smell of the medicinal herbs he had given to the girl. When he picked the two kittens up earlier, he could also smell the beefsteak and bacon cream pasta that he had given them this morning as well. That made Cale certain. The events of the last few days were finally resolved in Cale's head. "Did you think I wouldn't know?" The two kittens' golden eyes continued to shake. Cale looked at the siblings he had been feeding the last few days and started to smile. Chapter 12, Picked It Up, 5. Tap. Tap. Even at the rough patting, the baby kittens could only stiffly stare at Cale. Cale thought about the moment when he first met Choi Han. The injured silver kitten was growling while the red kitten was whining next to it. The silver kitten should be the older sister with gray hair and the younger brother must be the red kitten. Cale had a bright smile on his face. He looked toward the kittens and started to speak. "We'll talk later." The siblings who seemed to be beast people avoided his gaze and Hans confusingly replied. "Are you talking to me?" "Not you." Hans looked at Cale and the two kittens with an even more confused expression on his face, before holding the kittens even tighter. It was a movement that seemed to show that he was trying to avoid a dangerous person. However, he soon had to approach Cale once again. "Are you heading back out?" It was because Cale changed his coat and was preparing to leave again. "Where will you be going?" "I have a promise to keep and someone to meet." "Young master, you are going to keep a promise?" Hans looked to be shocked again, as he questioned Cale. "You seem to be getting ruder." The deputy butler's apology was very quick. Is he really the best of the butler candidates? He seemed decent by the way he handled Choi Han's issue. Cale felt like Hans, who was caressing the kittens with a wide grin on his face, was not very reliable. "I'm going to take him to the capital as well." Cale was thinking about this, something that Hans would never expect even in his dreams, no, something that Hans would lament even if he learned about it in his dream, before Cale asked about the person he had not seen for a while. "Where's Ron?" Hans had a satisfied smile on his face at that question. "I heard that Choi Han Nem will be going with you as one of your guards for the beginning part of your journey to the capital. Is that true?" Hans was thinking about Choi Han, who had defeated all of the Count's Night Brigade members today. He was more skilled than expected, making it easy for him to be Cale's guard as Cale wanted. Of course, neither Hans nor the knights knew that Choi Han had hidden his true power. Mr. Ron found out that Choi Han Nem will be going with you and went out with Choi Han Nem to purchase some clothes and other necessary items for travel. Ah, Chef B. Crocs went with them as well. I see. I'm relieved. They seem to be getting along well. There was a rare, extremely bright smile on Cale's face. The smile was very fitting with his beautiful red hair. Hans started to speak while being happy about Cale's bright smile. Mr. Ron, Choi Han Nem, and even B. Crocs seemed to be excited about serving you. He could see an instantaneous change in Cale's face as he said that. Why would Cale suddenly look like he lost his appetite? Hans could not figure it out. Both individuals headed outside the main gates once again. As he got on the carriage, Cale asked Hans, who was watching him leave. "Oh, Hans. Don't the deputy butlers learn basic martial arts? And you are the greatest butler candidate." The corner of Hans's lips started to move up and down. Count de Ruth cherished Hans because he took care of things well and had the best personality as well. "Yes, sir. I know the basics for 3 different styles: martial arts, dagger arts, and spear arts. A good butler needed to learn a couple different basic fighting styles, just in case something happened and the family members needed to run away." "Amazing. I guess I am a bit amazing." Cale could not hold back his smile watching Hans shrug his shoulders, while his lips continued to flicker. The 2 kittens could only shake their head as they watched Hans and the sly smile on Cale's face. "I'm leaving now." Cale made up his mind to take Hans to the capital to take care of all of the annoying things he didn't want to deal with before he then closed the carriage door. The carriage headed into the fog and the now stronger rain to head to his destination. Cale looked up at the sign before opening the door. Ring. The clear ringing of the bell and a desolate shop welcomed Cale. "I guess nobody is here because of the rain. Welcome, young master." Billows. The bastard of the Flynn Merchant Guild. He welcomed Cale as if they had known each other for a long time. Cale sat in front of the counter and made eye contact with Billows. "I promised to come back. I needed to keep my promise." "Of course. Promises need to be kept. Should I prepare the book and tea from last time?" "Yes, 3 cups of tea please." "Which teas should I make?" Cale ordered 3 types of tea and set a time for Billows to bring the teas up before turning around and heading up to the 3rd floor. Drip drip. The rain was getting even worse. Tisk. Cale clicked his tongue and went back to sit at the same spot near the 3rd floor window and looked out. "The rain is pretty strong, isn't it?" Billows came up and sat across from him and put down a single cup of tea. Cale was observing Billows closely. Choi Han, B. Crocs, Ron. And finally, Billows. These were the names of the individuals who continued to show up in the novel past Volume 1. Of course, Billows only has about 2 sentences written about him in Volume 1, as the owner of the tea shop that Choi Han stops by to rest. He returns in Volume 3 to swear his loyalty to Choi Han and reveal his ambitions. Reveal. That word was important. He's always been a greedy person. Billows was different from Hong Gildong. He was not sad that he could not call his father, father, or his brother, brother. In fact, he was just trying to beat them. He wanted to make it so that they had no choice but to accept him. He wanted to create a situation where they will have no choice but to introduce him as son, to introduce him as the younger brother. He must be exhausted. Cale thought Billows lived an exhausting life. However, he did not hate that. In fact, having that type of greed made him seem more human. He didn't like the people who had the abilities and strength, but said things like, "Ho ho, I'm just going to give up. I have no choice." Why would you give up on something that could be yours? You should always take what is yours. Anyways, this person had to meet with Choi Han at least once during the time frame of Volume 1. It had to just be a short encounter. Cale could hear Billows's voice breaking his train of thought. "Young master, I heard that you are going to head to the capital. Are you going to keep sitting there? Don't you have work to do? Seeing Cale pretending to be annoyed made Billows smile. He did not even try to hide it. This really was a very, very interesting young master. However, Billows could tell that he had a pretty sharp mind. I will be heading to the capital as well. I guess I will be following after you. Cale already knew about it. In order for Billows and Choi Han to have an encounter in Volume 3, Billows needed to head for the capital soon as well. Billows had a stoic expression as he asked Cale, who was sipping his tea and looking out the window, a question. Young master, it seems like you have changed. Seeing Cale turn to look at him, Billows started to smile. Cale motioned with his chin for Billows to continue. You seem different than your nickname. Which one? Trash. Billows could see the corners of Cale's lips starting to go up. He definitely was different. This Cale was not the Trash that he knew about. That Trash did not know how to make such an expression. It was a slightly bitter smile. Should I have gotten a bit drunk and broken a chair or something? Billows did not know what Cale was thinking. Yes. You are right. Trash. Haven't you always been a trashy young master? Did he not have any fear? Cale could not help but wonder, as Billows said such a thing to the Count's son, the firstborn of the ruler of the territory. Was Billows the one who had something to drink? But Cale did not want to fight with Billows. Billows was someone who was going to take over a large merchant guild. And Billows was being sincere. He was not smiling, he was actually sincerely asking the question. Haven't you always been a trashy young master? Cale decided to answer the question. It was not a hard question to answer anyways. It was easier than figuring out how to make money when you have no money. Billows. Cale had a smile on his face but did not laugh as he called out to Billows. You can't call your father, father. You can't call your brother, brother. Billows's gaze turned chilly. He started to take notice of the young master in front of him who had no problem touching his sore spot. Just like he had touched Cale's sore spot, he was returning the favor by touching his most painful sore spot. Cale just silently made eye contact with Billows for a bit. The rain started to pour even harder outside. Cale broke the silence and started to smile as he asked. Are you going to keep being the bastard? Are you satisfied with that? Billows could feel Cale's sharp gaze on him. I know you're not. Cale leaned back on the chair and continued on with an expression that seemed to be thinking about the past. I've acted like trash for about 10 years, ever since I started when I was 8 years old. Wow. Now that I think about it, Cale Henituse has been doing trashy things since he was 8 years old. He started drinking when he was 15. What a guy. Cale thought about the past of the original Cale that was present in his mind and started to smile. That smile looked scary to Billows. At that moment, a small noise cut through the rain to reach Cale and Billows. Squeak. Squeak. It was the sound of someone coming up the stairs. Cale looked past Billows's shoulder to the entrance of the third floor. He could see someone's head. Black hair. It was Choi Han. Behind him was Ron. Cale had told a servant to tell Choi Han to come to this tea shop later in the day. Cale moved his gaze away from the two of them and started to speak to finish his conversation with Billows. Choi Han and Ron finished coming up the stairs and looked toward Cale as he started to speak. Billows's stoic face felt pretty chilly. It's okay to throw away something you've been doing for around 10 years. Cale's eyes started to look more alive as he continued. I can't live as trash forever. Of course, Cale would still spend all the money he wants and do whatever pleases him, even if he wasn't trash. He was going to live peacefully and enjoy life as the son of a rich noble. Although that was different than the direction of Billows's life, what mattered was that both of them were not going to continue living the way they had been living. Aren't you the same? The corner of Billows's lips started to slowly move upward. He then bowed and started to snicker. After silently snickering for a bit, Billows raised his head up and looked toward Cale. I am indeed tired of it. Billows was laughing as he said he was tired of it. See? I told you. Cale shrugged his shoulders and motioned for Choi Han and Ron to come over. At that moment, Billows got up from the seat and started to speak. I will see you at the capital. Cale started to frown. It would be complicated if they met at the capital right away. Why bother? Cale motioned for Billows to go away, and Billows respectfully bowed before leaving. Ron, Choi Han, and the descending Billows made eye contact, but they all just ignored each other. Good. Cale welcomed that scene. Choi Han and Billows just barely ran into each other. It was just like in the book. Cale started to smile at the other two people with satisfaction. Ron, I knew you would come with him. According to Hans, B. Crocs went with you too, but I presume he went back to the kitchen. He has a strong sense of responsibility for that kitchen. Young master, are you close with that person? Cale shrugged his shoulders at the unexpected question from Ron. No. I see. Cale pushed it aside as nothing important, but Ron definitely heard it. He heard Cale say that he cannot keep living as a trash. Cale stopped looking at Ron, whose response trailed off, and made eye contact with Choi Han. I guess you can't trust the rumors. What the hell is he saying? Cale ignored Choi Han's words. At that moment, Billows brought up the other 2 cups of tea that Cale had ordered earlier. Should I give these cups to these 2 gentlemen? Cale started to smile again. I ordered them in advance. Cale personally picked up the teacups and put one in front of each person. In front of Choi Han was the tea he just randomly ordered from the menu. As for Ron, I specially ordered this for you since it seems like you like it a lot. Why else would you bring it for me every day? It was warm lemon tea. Cale could see Ron looking odd and felt the biggest satisfaction he had felt all day. One Hong Gildong was a Korean outlaw during the Joseon dynasty who had a similar story of being an illegitimate son. Chapter 13, picked it up, 6. But behind that satisfaction, Cale suddenly felt chills on the back of his neck. It was because Ron drank the lemon tea without any complaints. Clack. Why did the sound of the teacup being placed on the table feel so loud? Thankfully, it was not just Cale being paranoid. Choi Han, who had been quietly enjoying his tea, started to frown. Why don't you enjoy your tea a little more quietly? Ron held back his laughter after seeing Choi Han take a peek at Cale before speaking in a more respectful tone to him. Today, he had found a decently useful sword for Choi Han. It was a sword made by the same blacksmith as the one who made B. Crox's cooking knife. Want to try it out? I will not fight against someone who is trying to cut someone else with a cooking knife. His son, B. Crox, kept nagging Choi Han to fight him with that sword. It was because B. Crox learned a bit about Choi Han's strength from that short bout last time, and wanted to find out more. However, Choi Han continued to reject him. Ho, what a funny punk. What, do I need to bring a bloodied sword like you? Choi Han closed his eyes for a moment before opening them back up and responded to B. Crox as if he was confirming it for himself. I will now be someone who protects. He said even I could do it? What the heck are you saying? Ron watched his son and Choi Han's cute bickering, before following Choi Han to come see Cale. He didn't expect to hear such a precious thing. I can't live as a trash forever. That was what Ron was thinking about as he drank the lemon tea. But it looked like he was glaring at Choi Han. Cale was watching that scene with satisfaction. Ron and Choi Han's relationship in The Birth of a Hero was just like this. They were always at each other's throats, but still continued to travel together. They were tied together by a contract, but they both knew they could also rely on one another. Cale thought that a lot of things got twisted because of his actions to not get beaten up, but it looked like their relationship was forming in a similar manner. It is disappointing that it got twisted a bit, but my life comes first. I can't let the novel dictate my life. For Cale, his life was the first priority. After that, it was that everybody living within his territory lived peacefully. What else could you need? Sweet teas are really the best. Ron flinched at the words that Cale happily said. The tea time for these three individuals ended in the middle of the downpour. I guess the next time I will see you will be at the Capitol. Cale shook his head toward Billows, who greeted Cale as he came down from the third floor after tea time. I will be coming here every day for a while. Is that so? To read the book. Whatever I feel like doing. Please feel free to visit whenever you would like. This tea shop is open to you at all times, young master. Billows was watching Cale, who walked by while pretending not to hear what he said, with curiosity. Ron was just quietly observing them from behind. The bastard son of the Flynn Merchant Guild. The fact that he was extremely talented made the official children resent him. That was why Billows had to come to this remote, yet profitable region in the Henituse territory. He couldn't even use the family name of Flynn, either. Ron was observing Cale being friendly with this greedy Billows and clicked his tongue. It was because he thought to himself, why does it matter to me if that puppy young master is close to Billows? Tisk. I guess even dislike creates affection. I don't want my dislike of you to turn into affection. Ron let out a sigh after seeing that the clueless Choi Han had misunderstood. Not you, punk. Ron's gaze was on Cale. Ron was planning on heading to the Capitol anyways. It was because he had a bad feeling about it? He had been thinking about it countless times ever since Choi Han came out from the forest of darkness and entered the city with that dense murderous aura on him. The reason Ron had to hide out in this territory. The reason he had to escape from the eastern continent. It looked like he needed to research the people responsible for it one more time. Wouldn't it be appropriate for me to make sure our puppy young master safely arrives at the Capitol and safely leaves as my final duty as his servant? He claimed to others while laughing that he would be by the young master's side because he found Cale's scared expression to be funny, but would an assassin ever tell the truth to others? I should tell B. Crocs to make food that our little puppy young master will like during the journey. Cale was someone he looked after even more than his own son, B. Crocs. Ron knew very well about the terrible things Cale has done, and the terrible personality that Cale had. However, there was someone else he knew. Ron remembered how the young Cale had consoled his father when his mother died. He also saw how Cale hated his stepmother and her family, but never caused a ruckus with them, even when he was drunk. But he definitely is still trash, tisk. 18 years. Ron had watched over Cale for too long. Cale returned to his chamber immediately after returning to the estate, only to find the two baby kittens staring up at him. Ah, I forgot about the two of you. He should have brought Choi Han, who cherishes small animals. Choi Han had returned to his own room after saying that his heart needed to become stronger to be someone who protects. When Cale laughed and asked who Choi Han was going to protect, Choi Han responded that he would let Cale know once he became stronger. That answer gave Cale the chills. Cale didn't know why someone as strong as Choi Han would want to become even stronger. Hans approached Cale as he was staring at the kittens. Young master, what do you think? Aren't they even cuter, lovelier, and more adorable now? They are so mean though, they wouldn't even let me pet them. Haha. Hans crouched next to the kittens and looked up at Cale with satisfaction. His expression was so full of admiration that it surprised Cale and Ron. His expression was not related to the cuteness of the kittens. Don't you agree? This strong butler candidate seems to like cats very much. Oh, I guess so. The two kittens, that were sitting on a silk cushion that came from who knows where, definitely looked fuller and healthier. What kind of magic did this deputy butler do in that short amount of time? However, the two kittens continued to avoid Hans's gaze. It seemed to be a very stereotypical relationship between a butler and a cat. Then I will be heading out now, young master. Please call me if there is anything you need for the kittenims. Just go. After verifying that Ron got Hans to leave, Cale avoided the sparkling eyes of the kittens as he went into the bathroom. At that moment, the kittens' ears fell down. But then... Hoo! Ron approached the kittens after getting Hans to leave. Only Ron and the two baby kittens were currently in the bedroom. You are children of the cat tribe. The golden eyes of the kittens turned sharp. However, Ron did not seem to care, as he verified that the bathroom door was closed before standing in front of the kittens. Good. There was an odd smile on Ron's face. The cat tribe was known for their sensitivity to their surroundings. The cat tribe was one that was better known in the eastern continent than the western continent, but there was no way that someone like Ron, who was involved with assassinations, would not know about them. Unlike most beast people, who became violent when they went berserk, the cat tribe became stealthier and sharper. That was why they were a scary tribe, although they were not at the level of the wolf, tiger, or lion tribes. There was only one thought on Ron's mind as he watched the two cat tribe children. It was a sudden thought, and they were still young, but I can teach them. Ron checked to make sure that the door to the bathroom was closed once again. The cat tribe put a lot of importance on relationships. If they trust someone once, they will never betray them. They were suspicious by nature, but, like the wolf tribe, they valued interpersonal relationships. Children of such a tribe came looking for Cale on their own accord. Ron thought it would be nice to give his puppy young master a farewell present. Ron moved a bit closer to the cat tribe children. He then reached out to caress the head of the slightly larger silver kitten. Slap! The silver kitten slapped his hand away and quickly moved away to the corner of the room along with the red kitten. Who? Ron's eyes turned curious. These cat tribe children seemed to have already figured him out. It made sense, since they needed to quickly recognize people like him, people who were close with death, in order to live for a long time. Even if cats do have 9 lives, they needed to treasure them. The cat tribe was known for their long lives as well as their stealthy night movement. In this regard, they were stealthier than anyone else. Ron started to smile. One child is fog and the other one is poison. The silver one was fog and the red one was blood, or poison. Even if they did not become killers, they had the right foundations to become shadows. The silver kitten turned its head away as Ron said that, while the red kitten snorted. The two siblings had no desire to become killers who gave off such a thick scent of death. The two kittens scoffed at Ron, as if they knew about his identity as an assassin already. Once Cale came out of the bathroom, they were still sticking very close to each other as they looked up at Cale. Stop looking at me. They immediately stopped looking at him once he said that. Ron. Go get me my meal from B. Crocs. Ron left and Cale sat down on the couch and looked toward the two kittens. He then spoke to the two kittens who were whining in a corner far away from him. You two are part of the cat tribe, aren't you? The two kittens nodded their heads without making eye contact with Cale. Are you planning on following me? There were no responses to this question. Instead, the red kitten slowly walked over and rubbed its cheek on Cale's leg, while the silver kitten approached Cale soon after and started to tap Cale's foot with her front paw. Cale already had a plan for these two siblings. He nodded his head and made up his mind about the kittens. Then make yourselves useful. The kittens immediately responded. Meow. Meow. Answer in human language. The pupils of the silver kitten, the older sister named An, started to sparkle as she spoke. I want to eat meat. I'm still hungry. The red kitten, the younger brother Hong, tapped Cale's leg as he added on. I want to eat cake. Cale responded to both of them. I will give you a lot of meat and cake, so you know what to do, right? Be useful. The kittens immediately replied, and that was how the two siblings, who were kicked out of the Fog Cat tribe, became a part of Count Henituse's household. 4 days later, Cale joined his family for breakfast for the first time in a while. Count de Ruth looked at his son, who was wearing extremely simple clothes, and started to smile. "I guess you are leaving today." Today was the day that Cale would leave the Henituse territory and head toward the capital. There are many Chinese characters for on, but I think the author is referencing the on, that means conceal, because she is the fog that Ron describes. 2. The name Hong is probably from the Chinese character for red. Chapter 14, Heading Out, 1. It doesn't look like you are nervous. Cale smiled instead of responding to his father's statement. Cale's complexion had gotten much better in the last few days. It had no choice but to get better. Since I didn't get beaten to a pulp. It was raining in the Henituse territory until yesterday. If the story went as it did in the novel, Cale would have been beaten to a pulp on a rainy day. Of course, Cale was not beaten up yesterday. He could also sleep well now. This was because he could feel the indestructible shield always surrounding his heart. Knowing that he could manage to survive, even if he did something wrong to someone like Ron or B. Crocs, made it easier for him to sleep at night. Cale looked at the breakfast spread that was fancier than ever before, as he asked. "It looks like the number of people in the envoy has grown again." "I asked you to reduce the number." He had asked his father to decrease the number of servants accompanying him to help with his needs. He said that Hans and Ron were enough. Of course, Hans turned pale at first, however, he started to pack right away after hearing that the kittens will be traveling with them as well. About that. For some reason, de Ruth stopped his sentence without finishing. At that moment, someone else's voice interjected itself into their conversation. "That was my decision." It was the Count's wife, Violin. Her hair was perfectly formed in a bun, without a single stray hair, as she was looking down at her plate. She looked so similar to her son, Basin. Even the way they both did not make eye contact with Cale and had a stoic expression was the same. "We can't have someone from our family looking poor and terrible just because you want to go with such a small envoy." It was an extremely stoic voice. Violin then lifted up her gaze to look in Cale's direction before continuing on. "I am not saying you are terrible. Even I know that much." Violin hesitated for a moment after hearing Cale's response, before taking another bite of her food and continuing to speak. "People, especially nobles, care a lot about appearances." The Countess Violin. Cale quietly watched her. She was born as the eldest daughter of a poor artist's family, and had dreamt about being the head of a merchant guild when she grew up. She was influenced by the luxury items being sold to the nobles and came to the Henituse territory. Once she got here, she fell in love with the art of sculpting. Eventually, she met Count de Ruth and fell in love, living as the director for the territory's cultural business operations. In Cale, no, Kim Rock-Soo's opinion, she had a lot of pride for herself and her life, which was why she had a lot of pride for this family as well. Even though she knew that Cale was silently observing her, she continued on without a single change in her expression. "Art is not for those human *mm. Cut off without the h, on purpose." She was a bit of a coarse speaker because she worked in the merchant world for a while. Anyways, there are a lot of people who think that appearances reveal everything about a person. That was her way of telling Cale to take a lot of servants with him. Her goal was for Cale to not be judged negatively just because he only took a few servants with him. Naturally, Cale wanted to take a lot of people to do his biddings for him as well. How nice and relaxing would it be? He was finding it difficult to get changed without a servant now. Kim Rock-Soo had been in this world as Cale for only about a week, but he already could not let go of that easy life. However, a few days into Cale's future was a crazy black dragon. If he cannot release this crazy dragon in advance, it might go wild and kill a lot of people. Although Cale didn't care about what happened to other people, he still did not want to see people dying in front of his eyes. Furthermore, he also didn't want to take responsibility for those people who will be injured because of the dragon. Responsibility was a heavy burden, and for someone like Kim Rok-soo, who had taken responsibility for his own life since he was a young boy, he knew that responsibility related to people and people's lives was the scariest and heaviest burden. That was why he started to speak. Art is the mirror of the soul. Violin lifted her gaze off of her plate and looked toward Cale. This was the first time in a long while that the two of them had made eye contact with each other. You do know about that? Yes. I do know. Cale had roamed around the entire territory the last 4 days to prepare the things he needed on this trip. He just recited one of the things he saw on one of those trips. Sculpting is not just cutting into a chunk of marble. It is creating a reflection of what is in your heart. This time, it was Cale who looked at his plate and continued to eat while Violin was watching him. I read that on the plaque at the gallery. The gallery in the Henituse territory displayed the works of new sculptors. That statement that was written on the plaque in the gallery was something that Violin had personally written. Do as you wish. I will reduce the number of people going with you, but, in return, the carriage and everything in it shall be of the highest quality. That is how it should be for us Henituse people. That is fine with me. Please give me the most expensive stuff. Great. I will make sure you have a carriage that won't even hurt your butt as you travel across bumpy roads. Only the best. Cale could not see it because he was looking at his plate, but there was a slight smile on Violin's face before it disappeared. Count de Ruth, who had been watching this from the start, let out a fake cough to cover up his slowly rising smile and asked Cale. Did you verify the information from Hans regarding the personalities of all the nobles who will be going to the capital? De Ruth had used his own network, as well as the Information Guild to purchase information on the other nobles, and had handed it to Hans to give to Cale. Yes. It was pretty entertaining. It was probably difficult to purchase that file. In fact, it probably cost a fortune. Although it only had about 3 or 4 lines about each person, it was precious and expensive to purchase information on nobles. There are some petty ones, some stupid ones, some smart and scary ones, even some who are desperate for power. Looks like all sorts of people are coming this time. Of course, there were also some stupidly nice people, villains, and trash as well. You read the file I sent you. Ahem. Anyways, do as you please. But Cale. I heard a strange rumor. Cale's shoulders flinched just ever so slightly. Apparently the man-eating tree, that black tree, has changed. It is now a white tree with beautiful blue leaves. There are even grass growing in that spot where nothing used to grow. The place that had changed the most in the last 4 days was none other than the top of the hill in the slums. It was a location where only the black tree had resided. However, that tree turned white with blue leaves after Cale had resolved its grudge, and it was now a beautiful tree that looked almost divine. Isn't it an interesting rumor? It is. What an interesting rumor. Cale had no intentions of revealing his ancient power right now, so he simply pretended to have no knowledge of it. There was no way that Count de Ruth did not know about the fact that he went to the slums. However, he would not have any knowledge of the ancient power. He would just suspect that something happened with Cale and the man-eating tree. Yes, but it isn't that big of a deal. However, you need to pay attention to rumors no matter what you do. There is nothing scarier than human eyes and mouths. However, anything that happens inside the territory is fine for members of our household. I will keep that in mind. Cale felt like he really could live a peaceful life, as long as he remained in their territory. How great would it be to quickly come back from the capital and live the life of a couch potato? The luxurious breakfast that was made for Cale, who was leaving for the capital, finally came to an end. He received goodbyes from the Count and Countess, who couldn't watch him leave because they had work to do, and then made eye contact with his siblings, who were awkwardly standing there. His younger brother, Basin, just shook his head at Cale's question. His younger sister, Lily, slowly approached him. 7 years old. This youngest sibling of his was 11 years apart from him. Please have a safe trip. Thanks. You be safe here too. Lily vigorously nodded her head. Yes. She then quietly looked at Cale. Cale just casually asked in response to her gaze. Should I buy you a present while on my trip? Really? As I thought. She wanted a present. Cale nodded his head as he watched the surprised, amazed, and happy expression all taking turns showing up on Lily's face. Yes. What would you like? A sword. What? Please buy me a sword. A 7-year-old wants a sword. Seeing the shock on Cale's face, Basin started to speak. Hyungnim, Lily's dream these days is to become a swordsman. Cale seriously looked toward Lily. The people of this household all had long arms, long legs, and a good physique. Lily was only 7 years old, but she was tall for her age and could easily become a good swordsman if she put in the effort. I guess it would suit her. Lily's eyes started to sparkle. I will buy you an expensive one. Lily started to smile as she lowered her head in embarrassment instead of responding. Cale did not see this, as he looked toward his 15-year-old younger brother, who was looking at him. You want something too? A fountain pen. Got it? The breakfast came to an end once he got the list of presents from his siblings. Cale's expression was odd as he stood in front of the carriage that would take him to the capital. How odd. He had an odd expression as he asked the person standing next to him. Why is it that their seat is better than my seat? Cale was looking at the expensive and soft cushion next to him, as well as the 2 kittens sitting on the cushion. Young master, shouldn't our precious cats travel comfortably on this trip? They are so small and precious. Hans answered as he put the special treats he prepared for the cats in the carriage as well. Cale and Ron both had blank expressions on their faces. It's because he has not seen them create fog and fill it with poison. Cale called on Anhong to an empty corner of the garden 3 days ago. What can you do? In response to his question, An created fog while in her cat form, while Hong used a bit of his blood to spread poison into the air. Of course, An was able to control the poisonous fog to prevent Cale from dying. Furthermore, the poison Hong could spread was only at the level of paralysis right now. You two are quite useful. An and Hong proudly answered back after hearing Cale's praise. We were able to run away because of our poisonous fog. We are quite useful. Starting from that day, An and Hong were able to eat delicious food all day long. Naturally, Hans was happy to provide for them. Young master, I will be sitting with the driver up top. Okay. Ron jumped up next to the driver, and Cale was about to board as well when Choi Han approached him. Cale Nim. Choi Han said that he did not want to call Cale young master, instead choosing to call him Cale Nim. Is it okay for me to not be in the same carriage protecting you? Cale's expression turned like he had eaten some bitter persimmon. Is there a reason to do that? That was what Cale's expression was saying, and Choi Han didn't say anything else, instead just nodding his head. Cale started to squint his eyes while watching Choi Han walk away. It's really weird. Choi Han's eyes were still not very clear. His mind still seemed to be full of anger and thoughts of revenge. When Cale mentioned yesterday that they had sent people to Harris village, he could see the anger in Choi Han's eyes. But he felt a little different than before. He wasn't in complete despair like in the novel, thinking something along the lines of, the world does not want me to be happy. How could they kill all of my loved ones? That was why it was weird. He recovered pretty quickly. He seemed to be at the stage in the novel when he was traveling with B. Crocs, Rosalind, and Locke, with a sword in his heart but a calm demeanor on the outside. He let it be since it wasn't bad, but Cale had an oddly bitter feeling in his mouth. It was at that moment. I don't think this is your spot. The leader of the envoy, the vice captain of the territory's night brigade, approached Choi Han and started to speak. The vice captain looked at Choi Han from head to toe before smirking, like he was looking down at Choi Han. I knew we would have at least one person like this. Cale clicked his tongue. Choi Han had hidden his abilities to that of an average level. The problem was that Choi Han was the first person Cale brought to the Count's estate as a guest, and the fact that Count Deruth treated him like an important guest. Adding on the fact that he was going as part of Cale's guards this time made some people start to dislike and oppose him. They didn't annoy him visibly because he was still Cale's guest, but there were a lot of things they were secretly doing to annoy Choi Han. Young master, I do not think Choi Han Nim is getting along with the other knights who will be going with us to the capital. Is that so? Yes. I think the vice captain is responsible for it. I got it, Hans. You can stop worrying about it. Cale thought about Hans's report and felt bad, not for Choi Han, but for the vice captain. Soon enough, he'll realize that his eyes were not just at the ground, but completely underground. It'll be fine as long as he doesn't do anything to get beaten up. Cale did not choose to try to resolve their issues. The vice captain will not be able to sleep properly once he sees Choi Han's real skills. How could he sleep when he is extremely scared? Young master, shall we leave now? The vice captain asked Cale, and Cale closed the carriage door as he answered. Yes. Let's go. 15 soldiers, 5 knights, and 1 special guard. Cale's envoy, which consisted of this protection squad and then some other people, finally started to head toward the capital. Of course, as with most fantasy world travels, it was not a very uneventful trip. Nobody dared to touch Cale's carriage in the Henituse territory. The carriage did not have the flag that represented the family, but the carriage itself had the golden turtle, the symbol of the Henituse family, drawn on it. It was representative of the Henituse family's love for wealth and longevity. However, as soon as they left the Henituse territory, they ran into a situation. As expected, they really do show up. While they were rushing through a mountain range, tens of people suddenly showed up in the valley. Pay the toll if you want to cross this mountain. Take out everything you have. If we find anything after you claim to have taken everything out, it will be 1 slap for every 1 bronze we find. Yes, it was the bandits. There were bound to be bandits in a fantasy story, but the fact that there were tens of them was surprising. They probably relied on their numbers to attack this carriage, which only had 5 knights. Cale looked toward the kitten on, who was yawning and asked. You think they can't see the symbol on my carriage? I guess so. Idiots. Beginners. Cale nodded his head at Hong's assessment. He was not afraid of bandits. Why would he be? Knock knock. The knocking came from the small window by the driver's seat before the window slightly opened, and Ron looked inside. Young master, it looks like we will need to take a break. There seem to be quite a lot of rabbits here. Rabbits? Cale shook for a moment. Ron went, ah, before smiling and added on. Ah, this rabbit is different from the rabbit I was going to catch for you, young master. Of course, these rabbits will not be caught by me but by other people. Cale was being protected by someone who was scarier than the bandits. He listened to the sound of the bandits' screams coming from outside the carriage, as he started to calculate the time. About a day and a half. In about a day and a half, they would arrive around the area where the Black Dragon was being tortured. It was earlier than when Choi Han arrived in the novel. This was the reason he had made them rush forward without taking any breaks. One looking really calm even though he still has a strong desire for revenge internally. 2 been really blind. Chapter 15, Heading Out, 2. In order to achieve the results he wanted, Cale had to choose to camp outside. There were no villages along the way until the village near the hidden cave of the Black Dragon. Meow. The red cat tribe kitten Hong meowed and wagged his tail, as if he was excited. It was because of the delicious smell filling the area. The joy of the day comes from eating a delicious dinner. That was what Cale was thinking. A warm dinner was the signal to end the long and tiring day and the start of a relaxing night. Tonight's main course was a soup with rabbit meat. Damn it! It was not Ron's doing. Cale turned his gaze to the side. Choi Han, the person who had caught the rabbits, was happily eating his soup. Mia. Tap. Tap. An and Hong were tapping on his leg, asking him to give it to them if he didn't want it. Hans had a wide smile on his face as he cautiously approached the two children. Would our precious kittenems like to eat the jerky that I prepared for you? It is very healthy, without any salt or preservatives. Naturally, An and Hong ignored Hans. Hans, who did not know they were part of the cat tribe, found that sass to be cute as well and continued to linger around them. Contrary to the fact that they had their first battle, it was a very relaxed and peaceful environment. However, the atmosphere around the night seemed to be a bit odd. They kept peeking toward Choi Han, who was eating his soup next to Cale. The vice captain seemed to be full of agony. Cale's party had to fight off tens of bandits today. The one to handle most of those bandits was naturally Choi Han. He did not kill the bandits. However, he had no issues cutting off a limb or leaving them a deep scar. Not only that, he did it in an unbelievable speed too. Young master, the battle is over. The vice captain had reported this to Cale with a shocked expression on his face. He had not expected it to end so quickly. The bandits were ones who were pushed out of power in a different area nearby. The bandits they had thought were stupid were at their limits and felt that they could handle 5 knights because of their numbers. Unfortunately, their first target ended up being Cale's carriage with Choi Han. The reason the vice captain's face was completely pale was not because of the strength of the bandits. Choi Han approached next to the vice captain and added on. It was a light battle. Not even enough for a warm-up. Cale could see the vice captain slightly flinch after hearing Choi Han's words. He could also see Choi Han smirking while looking at the vice captain flinch. He really isn't the type to let people do as they please with him. There was no way that someone like Choi Han, who had no issues beating up the count's son, would be nice and let people just continue to mess with him. Do you have no appetite? Cale seemed to be frustrated, as Ron approached him with his usual benign smile. He looked back and forth between the rabbit soup and Ron, before suddenly realizing something. This old man enjoyed making fun of him. Yes. None at all. Choi Han responded to that statement. Are you feeling unwell? No, nothing like that. I would have no issues if you caught anything other than rabbits. Cale looked toward Choi Han and waved his hand to tell Choi Han to not mind him. However, Choi Han continued to look toward Cale with a serious gaze. What are you looking at? Was that your first time experiencing a battle? Cale just casually responded back to Choi Han, who asked with a serious expression. What battle? You mean with the bandits earlier? Of course. I've never seen so many bandits before. Choi Han nodded his head and quietly mumbled to himself. Must have been your first time facing potential death. Ha! One of the soldiers let out a gasp. Ha! Cale let out a loud gasp as if he was completely shocked. First time facing potential death, my ass. Do you know how nervous I've been the last few days because of you? That wasn't even it. Ron smiled as Choi Han brought back the rabbits. The sight of B. Crocs sharpening his cooking knife, Cale was also nervous because of them. Cale started to think about all of the nervous moments he has had since they left the Henituse territory. Now I really have no appetite. He had lost all of his appetite. The spoon in Cale's hand just fell onto the soup bowl. That was why he didn't realize that the soldiers were looking at him with an understanding gaze, or that Choi Han had stopped paying attention to everyone around him as he nostalgically thought about the past. Cale was thinking about how he didn't need to be so nervous anymore because he managed to avoid getting beaten up and also got the indestructible shield, when Choi Han's voice snapped him back to reality. Why does he keep talking to me? The first time is always difficult to handle. What are you talking about? As Cale stoically asked back, Choi Han had a slight smile on his face before he asked in a stoic expression. The gaze in his eyes was extremely serious. Cale Nim, do you not study any martial arts? Shouldn't you at least have the strength to protect yourself? There was concern in that seriousness. Cale wondered why Choi Han was suddenly becoming so serious, but decided to answer the question anyway. I have plenty of ways already. Cale took his gaze off of Choi Han and looked around. 15 soldiers who were stronger than him, and 5 knights who would do well no matter where they went. There were only a few servants aside from them, but Ron, B. Crocs, the 2 kittens, and even Deputy Butler Hans were much stronger than himself. Cale made eye contact with each of the people before turning back to Choi Han to ask. You can see them too, right? This is the protection for a wealthy count's son. Cale started to smile. He knew that they would all protect him. Of course, he wasn't sure about Ron or B. Crocs, but they would at least prevent him from getting killed by someone. And they are not the only protection. Cale decided to be a little more honest to Choi Han, who was sitting there looking at him. He patted his heart as he answered. I trust my heart. I will live. Of course. The indestructible shield surrounding his heart will protect him. Well, as long as he avoided people like Choi Han, that is. Choi Han looked toward Cale with shaky eyes. Mia. What are you doing? An and Hong approached Cale and started to push on his legs with their small paws. The claws on their paws hurt, making Cale frown, but the cat tribe siblings stopped eating and started to rub their cheeks on Cale's leg. Clack. Choi Han put down his empty soup bowl and stood up from his seat. I'll be practicing with my sword now. Right after eating. I feel like I need to get stronger. Scary punk. Are you trying to get strong enough to blow the whole earth away? Cale turned away in disgust. At that time, B. Crocs approached him with a new dish. Please enjoy. Oh. Thanks. Cale looked at the plate that was filled with the highest quality spices and highest quality beef steak, and started to smile. Bitter food and drinks like lemonade are best to restore your appetite. This was the first time Ron had handed him a lemonade since their interaction at the tea shop. Cale just ignored the lemonade because he was excited about the steak. If everyone has finished eating, we will start our evening training session soon. Cale could hear the vice captain's loud voice and started to think. The vice captain must have been motivated by Choi Han. Cale looked at the fired up knights and soldiers as he chowed down on the steak and even the rabbit soup as well. The rabbit soup was pretty good once he tried it. Of course, he adamantly declined the jerky the kittens offered him. There was no seasoning on it, so he wouldn't even touch it. *****. 3 days. Cale calculated as they entered the village. The black dragon will cause a mana explosion in 3 days. They were now in a viscount's territory that was right next to the Henituse territory. A villa belonging to the viscount was built in the mountain on the right side of this village a few years ago. Naturally, while it was labeled as the viscount's villa on the outside, in reality, it belonged to Marquis Stan, the person responsible for making the black dragon go crazy. The viscount of this territory was nothing more than a dog of the Marquis. And in the mountain behind the villa hides the cave with the black dragon. The black dragon causes a mana explosion and sends the cave and the mountain flying. Cale looked at the small peak to the right of the mountain he crossed and clicked his tongue. Vanyan of Marquis Stan's family. Cale was thinking about the Marquis' second son. He was a crazy psycho who crippled his own older brother to rise to the position of heir. That psycho visits the villa every so often to torture the black dragon for fun. Hans flinched at Cale clicking his tongue, and quickly brought Choi Han over and started to speak. Young master, I will take Choi Han Nim and quickly look for an inn. Please wait a moment. The carriage was currently stopped outside of the village entrance. Whatever. We will be right back. Cale nodded his head at Han's statement while observing Choi Han. He had a nostalgic look in his eyes. Just why would Choi Han fight with an existence that caused a mana explosion? It was because he could not throw this small and quiet village away. Heir's village. This village was similar to the village that taught him about both love and hate. That was why he made a move to save the lives of these village people that he did not even know. Cale started to frown as he called Choi Han over. Yes. Hurry back. Ah. A small gasp came out of Choi Han's mouth. This 17-year-old boy who had lived for tens of years started to have an innocent smile on his face as he nodded his head. Yes sir. I will be right back. Cale motioned as if he was annoyed, but Choi Han bowed before quickly starting to walk toward the village with Hans. Cale, who preferred this focused Choi Han to the one who had a blank expression, continued to watch him before suddenly starting to frown. He could see a carriage quickly heading in their direction. I have a bad feeling about this. Cale felt like someone with extremely sweaty hands was handing him a poisoned apple. It was a really bitter feeling. The cause of that bitter feeling was soon to be revealed. Such dash. Cale could not believe it. He could see an old man who could not manage to avoid the carriage, fall down on the road. He could also see Choi Han rushing toward the old man, as well as the carriage continuing to travel down the road like it was not going to stop. Such a cliché. There was a flag hanging on that carriage. A red snake. It was the symbol of Marquis Stan. Cale's eyes started to shake. It was about to happen. An incident was about to happen. Bang. Choi Han flung himself to rescue the old man, and the momentum forced him to smash into a building wall. Only then did the black carriage belonging to Marquis Stan finally stop. Cale let out a sigh as he opened the carriage door. It looked like he had no choice but to head over to the site of that cliché event. Remember, Choi Han really doesn't age. Part 2 of the series ends here. If you enjoyed it, please give us a like and subscribe so we can be motivated to make even better videos in the future.